In the early hours of World War II, long before the beaches of Normandy echoed with gunfire, another battle was already being lost quietly, relentlessly, beneath the cold waves of the Atlantic Ocean. No headlines announced it, no parades marked it, but every day, steel ships vanished into black water, torn open by unseen enemies. German U-boats hunted freely, and with every torpedo strike, the Allies lost more than metal. They lost food, fuel, ammunition, hope and time. By 1941, the numbers were terrifying. Cargo ships were being sunk faster than they could be replaced. Britain stood on the brink of starvation. American planners watched shipping charts climb upward like a death sentence. Even before the United States fully entered the war, the Atlantic had become a killing field. The enemy understood something brutal and simple. If you cut the supply lines, you don't need to defeat armies. You let them collapse on their own. Traditional shipbuilding offered no answer. Building a cargo ship was a slow, delicate process. Skilled riveters spent months hammering steel plates together, thousands upon thousands of times, forming holes that were strong but painfully slow to produce. Each ship was almost a handcrafted object, dependent on experienced labor that was already in short supply. And every month spent building one ship meant another dozen were lost to submarines. In Berlin, German Naval Command believed they had found the perfect formula for victory. Submarines were cheap, cargo ships were expensive, sink faster than the enemy can build, and the war ends itself. For a terrifying stretch of time, that calculation was correct. But thousands of miles away, far from naval headquarters and battle maps, something unexpected was beginning to formulate in a war room, but in the sparks and smoke of American shipyards. The man at the center of this transformation was not a naval officer. He wasn't even a shipbuilder by training. Henry J. Kaiser had built roads, dams, and industrial projects. He believed in speed, repetition, and process. When he looked at shipbuilding, he didn't see tradition. He saw inefficiency, and inefficiency, in wartime, was deadly. Kaiser asked a question that made experts uncomfortable. Why were ships built like works of art instead of machines? Why did one team have to finish before another could begin? Why rely on rivets when welding could fuse steel faster? Why train craftsmen for years when civilians could be trained in weeks? Naval engineers warned him. Admirals doubted him. Old shipbuilders mocked the idea. Welding, they said, was risky. Welded holes could crack. Civilian labor was unreliable. Assembly line ships were reckless. But Kaiser wasn't trying to make perfect ships. He was trying to make enough ships. And in war, enough can matter more than perfect. Shipyards exploded across the American coasts. California, Oregon, Washington, places that had never built ships before, suddenly became industrial hives. Thousands of civilians poured in, men too old to fight, women entering industrial work for the first time, teenagers learning skills overnight. Among them were welders whose torches would become weapons as powerful as any gun. Welding changed everything. Instead of drilling holes and driving rivets through overlapping steel plates, welders fused metal directly together. This eliminated thousands of steps, reduced weight, simplified training, allowed sections of ships to be built separately and joined later. Holes were no longer constructed from start to finish. They were assembled from massive prefabricated blocks, built simultaneously by different teams. One welder's refinement, adjusting weld sequencing to control heat stress prevented warping and cracking. Another improved joint angles to speed assembly. None of them were famous. None appeared in newspapers, but together they unlocked something no admiral could: time. The first Liberty ships shocked everyone. What once took 8 months took 8 weeks, then 4 weeks, then less. Every launch sent ripples through German intelligence reports. At first, commanders assumed exaggeration. Then they suspected deception. Finally, they faced the truth. The Americans were outbuilding the submarines. The SS Robert E. Peary became legend. Built in just over 4 days. It wasn't meant to be practical. It was meant to prove a point, and the point landed like a hammer. From that moment on, the arithmetic of the Atlantic War collapsed for Germany. Sink one ship, and 2 more appeared. Sink 10, and 20 followed. For U-boat captains, the ocean began to feel crowded. Convoys grew larger, escorts multiplied, air patrols expanded, and behind it all was an endless stream of Liberty ships, ugly, boxy, slow but unstoppable. These ships carried everything: tanks, trucks, fuel, food, medical supplies. Entire armies rode on welded seams, laid down by civilians who had never fired a shot. Battles were planned, not around bravery, but around logistics. And logistics, at last, were winning. What made this revolution so powerful wasn't just technology, it was mindset. Welders were encouraged to improve processes, not just follow instructions. Speed was celebrated. Innovation was rewarded. Mistakes were corrected, not punished. Every second saved multiplied across hundreds of ships. Germany could destroy ships, but it could not destroy this system. By 1942, the balance shifted. Allied losses continued, but they no longer mattered. Replacement outpaced destruction. The Atlantic, once a graveyard, became a highway. The flow of steel never stopped, and with it flowed momentum. This was the moment the war quietly turned. Not at Stalingrad, not at El Alamein, but in shipyards where welders worked under floodlights, sparks raining like fireworks, racing clocks instead of enemies. The Axis never found an answer because there was no military counter to industrial speed. A torpedo takes seconds. A welder working faster saves days, and days, multiplied by hundreds of ships, won the war. If you're discovering how ordinary people shaped extraordinary outcomes, make sure to stay with the channel, because the next part of this story reveals what happened when these ships finally reached Europe. The ocean did not care if a ship lasted 20 years. It only needed to last long enough to deliver its cargo. Liberty ships became floating arteries, pumping life into every front. They carried Sherman tanks bound for North Africa, aircraft parts destined for Britain, fuel for bombers striking deep into Germany, medical supplies for wounded soldiers, food for millions. Entire campaigns rested on welded seams. And behind every seam was a welder who understood that speed mattered more than perfection. Many of these workers never saw combat. They never wore uniforms, yet their contribution was absolute. Without them, invasions stalled. If you think battles are won only on front lines, stay with the channel, because the next part reveals how these ships reshaped the invasion itself. The invasion would fail, not because of bravery or tactics, but if supplies stopped flowing. Welders, working thousands of miles away, had unknowingly prepared the battlefield long before the first shot was fired. The British Isles had become a floating warehouse, fed continuously by welded ships crossing the Atlantic in endless convoys. German reconnaissance saw the buildup but underestimated its meaning. They believed that even if an invasion came, it could be starved into failure. They were wrong. When ports were damaged or destroyed, ships waited offshore. Delayed reinforcements. What they encountered instead was relentless pressure. Allied units advanced not because they were braver, but because they were continuously resupplied. Artillery never ran dry. Vehicles never sat idle. Wounded soldiers were evacuated quickly. Entire divisions rotated forward and back with mechanical efficiency. Behind this efficiency was a logistical miracle powered by welding. As the invasion expanded, temporary harbors, known as mulberries, were assembled floating ports built from prefabricated sections. These too relied on industrial speed. Even when storms destroyed one harbor, the supply flow continued through sheer volume. German commanders reported the same frustration again and again. Attack succeeded tactically, but failed strategically. A bridge destroyed was rebuilt overnight. A supply dump bombed was replenished within days. A unit depleted was reinforced immediately. It felt like fighting an enemy that regenerated endlessly. This psychological effect was devastating. Soldiers who once believed they could outlast the Allies began to realize time was against them. Every day favored the side that could replace losses instantly. Every delay benefited the force with unlimited supply. Morale shifted not because of speeches or propaganda, but because reality became undeniable. The Welders had turned time into an Allied weapon. As Allied forces pushed inland, the demand for supplies multiplied. Tanks consumed fuel at staggering rates. Artillery fired thousands of rounds per day. Engineers rebuilt roads and bridges constantly. All of it depended on cargo arriving without interruption. Liberty ships met that demand with mechanical consistency. Rocket attacks targeted ports. They could only slow an inevitable advance. The Liberty ships kept coming. Behind every mile gained, another ship unloaded. Behind every push forward, another convoy crossed. Behind every battle, a welder struck an arc, unaware that a decision made months earlier in a shipyard was now unfolding on foreign soil. The most remarkable part of this story is how invisible it was. Soldiers rarely saw the welders who made their advance possible. This is the hidden truth of modern warfare. Battles decide moments. Logistics decide outcomes. Yet again and again, one conclusion emerged. The war was decided by production speed. The Liberty ship program proved that civilian innovation could decide global outcomes. Not through secrecy or genius alone, but through bold willingness to abandon tradition.